Good morning. Three grassroots, nonpartisan community organizations are here today. We are the tenacious voice of parents of students with disabilities. We are ourselves parents of students with disabilities, and we bear the scars of helping our children cope with serious disability obstacles in schools. There are more than 1/3 students with disabilities in Ontario, and Bill 101 hurts these kids and their parents. I'm Bruce McIntosh. I'm a parent of 2 adults with disabilities who went through the school system from K to 12. I'm a board member and was the founding president of the Ontario Autism Coalition. To my left, your right, is Elizabeth Garkowski, a parent of 3 children, one of whom has disabilities. She is co-chair of Ontario Parents for Education Support. It's a grassroots organization of parents and of students with disabilities who advocate for better support for their kids in school. And next is David Lepofsky, a parent of a child with disabilities. He speaks today as chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. He is on the board of Ontario Parents of Visually Impaired Children, and he chairs the TDSB's Special Education Advisory Committee. Today's hearings send a loud message to parents. Look who's speaking at the grossly inadequate single day of hearings. The vast majority aren't the voice of parents or students or voters. We applaud unions and trustees for raising their voice and the vigor of their advocacy, but only 3 parent groups get heard today. Of them, the Ontario Autism Coalition speaks at 3 and the AODA Alliance at 4. Parents and students aren't some marginalized sideshow. Ours is the most important voice. Media coverage of this bill has largely focused on the reactions of trustees and unions. They are important voices, of course, but the most important voices of all are those of parents and students. The community should be spending much more time telling our stories to the committee. It's a cruel irony that the, quote, Putting Student Achievement First Act, what a title for a bill. How many times have we heard Paul Calandra say putting student achievement first? The more he says it, the more false it is. It's a smokescreen. It hides legal text that does exactly the opposite. The bill provides no new rights, no new education programs, and no new services or supports for students. It barely even uses the word student, and it weakens parents' voice. It does nothing to address the chronic disadvantage that over 1/3 vulnerable students with disabilities face at school. It will make student achievement worse for these students. 2 years ago, high school student Landon Ferris died all alone in his school's isolation room. There has been no coroner's inquest nor independent investigation. Bill 101 will do nothing to protect children like Landon's lives. This past December, 7-year-old Max Samau, a nonverbal autistic boy from Hamilton, was struck by a city bus. He had been placed on a modified schedule and sent home early due to lack of education assistance support. Bill 101 doesn't help those kids either. My organization's survey of hundreds of special education families, not only those with autism, found that 26% of the kids were on modified schedules or excluded from school entirely. That's up from 19% a year ago. Mr. Calandra says he's concerned about attendance, but his bill does absolutely nothing to get those kids into class. The bill misses glaringly obvious ways to promote accessibility for students, staff, and family members with disabilities. The bill gives the Minister of Education sweeping authority over building construction and renovation, yet it does not require the minister to ensure that this construction is fully accessible. And the government has an ugly track record of spending public money on new construction that has serious accessibility problems. We know what to expect for students with disabilities in school boards where the minister micromanages the board. Things have gotten worse for them at the 8 school boards his supervisors now run. Do you want a glimpse of the future under Bill 101? 2 weeks ago, the TDSB Special Education Advisory Committee held a town hall to hear from these parents. They told gut-wrenching stories. Calandra's TDSB supervisor, who is paid $350,000 a year to work 3 days a week, didn't even show up to listen to those parents. Calandra banned the TDSB from live streaming those meetings. Well, in the interests of transparency and informed voters, my organization live streamed it. You can watch it on the Ontario Autism Coalition YouTube channel. Bring tissues. Doug Ford promises to cut red tape and reduce bureaucracy. Oh yeah, Doug? Well, this bill makes the greatest injection of red tape and bloated bureaucracy that our school system has ever experienced. And money for this is going to come out of classrooms, from our kids. This bill creates a dizzying maze of new regulations that the Ford cabinet can enact and more regulations that the minister can create. It mandates a veritable blizzard of other new policies, directives, guidelines, and orders that the minister can issue. It'll be a nightmare trying to keep track of them. The minister needs more bureaucrats to draft all these regulations, orders, guidelines, and directives, and then explain them to 72 school boards. After that, he'll need them to read, review, and make the endless decisions that this bill assigns to the minister. None of that red tape and bureaucracy helps a single student. Now let's hear from Liz.
Thank you. Good morning. For years, Ontario students, particularly those with disabilities, have been underserved by our public education system. Parents have been asking for the same thing over and over again: more support, proper funding, smaller class sizes, meaningful access to education for all students, and the removal of the many disability barriers that still exist in our schools today. Because right now, our children, they aren't just being left behind. They are being left out entirely. And Bill 101 does nothing to improve any of it. I have taken the time to read this bill carefully, and I cannot point to a single thing in it that will improve my child's access to education. I cannot find her in this bill at all. What I can find is more restructuring, more centralization, and less accountability. And I have to ask, how does that translate into better outcomes for our students? Because from where we are sitting as parents, it doesn't. Let me tell you what we are actually experiencing in classrooms today. There are not enough staff to support the children in the building. Students with disabilities are not receiving consistent, meaningful access to their education. And we're seeing increasing incidents of violence affecting both students and staff because there's simply not enough supports in place to prevent escalation. In my own community and board, we've seen significant cuts to support staff, closures and relocation of disability support classrooms, and an increase in student to support ratios. My co-founder is currently facing a situation where her child might not even have an appropriate program available for her next year. We are also hearing from parents who are being told to keep their child at home because there's not enough staff to support them at school. That's not access to education, and it raises serious human rights concerns. We have been raising these concerns consistently, clearly. We have shown up. We have participated in consultations. We have put forward concrete recommendations, and yet None of that is reflected in this bill. Instead, it weakens one of the few remaining access points that parents have, their elected trustees, without making it clear what meaningful roles and responsibilities those trustees will continue to have. So parents may still be able to raise concerns, but it is increasingly unclear who will have the authority to respond to them. The removal of the school climate surveys is another example. These surveys gave students, staff, and families a way to speak honestly about what was happening inside their schools around safety, inclusion, and well-being. Removing them does not solve the problem. It removes the visibility. And when there is no data, it becomes much easier for claims to be made that everything is fine in our schools, when we know for a fact that it isn't. We are also seeing policy directions that fail to account for the realities of the students that are most impacted, focusing on measures like attendance, for example, without addressing why students may not be able to attend, or perhaps blocked from attending in the first place. This does not improve outcomes. It ignores barriers. And this is all what happens when decisions are made up in a tower and meaningful consultation is missing. And it raises the very real question: are parents actually being heard, or are we simply being managed? Because when I look at this bill, I don't just see what's included, I see what's missing. I don't see a strengthened commitment to special education. I don't see any increased support. I don't see policy that reflects the realities in our classrooms. And I definitely don't see a plan that improves outcomes for students who need support the most. From where we stand, it feels like we're being told, this is what you're getting, like it or not, instead of being asked, what do your children need? Parents should not be treated as bystanders in this system. We are not just passive observers. We are navigating this every single day alongside our children. So, we are asking the minister to do the work that should have been done from the very beginning, to consult meaningfully with parents, with disability advocates, with the communities who are directly impacted by these decisions. Because putting student achievement first cannot just be a title. It has to show up in policy, in funding, and in support. But right now, it doesn't. So I will leave you with this. If we cared as much about the students and meeting their needs as we do about budgets and restructuring the system to centralize power with the minister, we would already be seeing better outcomes in our classrooms. Thank you.
Good morning. In just a few minutes, the minister who is championing this bill through the legislature will appear before a committee of the legislature. I challenge him to tell us how much this bill is going to cost, how much all this new red tape and bureaucracy will cost. If you go to the government, any government, and certainly no less a conservative government, and propose anything new, the first thing they're going to say is, have you costed this? And so far, we haven't heard a word. Not only do we need it costed, we need it objectively costed by the Auditor General. The second thing, if you go before any government, and no less a progressive conservative government, and propose a new law, the second thing they're going to say after, what does it cost, is, don't you have enough power now? Well, look at what the minister has. He's got sweeping powers under the Education Act from before he even took office and before his government took office in 2018. Piled on top of those powers were a bunch of new ones 3 years ago by the government's Bill 98. That's not enough. Last fall, in the controversial Bill 33, the government gave even more powers to the minister. But Mr. Calandra, for him that's not enough. He needs more, he says. Well, to make the case for that, he's got to show what specifically he wants to do And why can't do it already under all of those sweeping powers he now has? I challenge him to do that in a few minutes when he appears before the standing committee, because from what I've seen, he never did. So you made a big issue about improving or battling student absenteeism, and the media flocked to write articles and cover that issue. Well, it's an important issue, but they've been in power these folks have been in power since 2018. Where's the track record of them trying to use all these sweeping powers to battle it? If they came before the legislature and said, we tried all of these, we just don't have enough power, that would be one thing. They've never, ever shown that. Let me give you just one example. My two colleagues have referred to times when students, particularly students with disabilities, are excluded from school. A principal, under the sweeping power they have in this province, tells them either not to come to school at all, or they can't come to school for more than a shortened school day. That leads to absenteeism forced on students with disabilities. That's part of the absenteeism problem. But it's not part of the absenteeism problem that the minister's talking about fixing. It's invisible. In fact, it was 7 years ago that we at the AODA Alliance and the Ontario Autism Coalition sat in this very room calling on the provincial government to do something to rein in the sweeping power, the arbitrary power, the unfair power to tell students with disabilities, stay home. Or come to school, but only for part of the day, among other students. So far, they have done nothing. They got ample power to solve it. You've heard from us and others that the government is not effectively serving the needs of students with disabilities. The government has sweeping power now to do that. It's refused to use it. Under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the government has the power to enact a kindergarten to grade 12 education accessibility standard, giving directions to school boards across the province on the barriers they have to tear down and prevent facing students with disabilities. They've had the mandate to do that since January of 2022, over 4 years ago. What have they enacted? Absolutely nothing. But here they are saying, we need more power. What is all this power about? It's about giving it all to one person, Paul Calandra, sitting here at Queen's Park, who's going to be able to issue directions, but more important, make decisions, one by one, micromanaging 72 school boards. This is an incredible load of red tape and bureaucracy. You're at a local school board under this bill. You got to figure out when you need the minister's approval, because it's all over the place in this bill. And then if you do try to get the minister's approval, you got to then go through all the paperwork of making your case to them or filling out their forms, which some bureaucrats got to invent, and then another bureaucrats have to read, evaluate, follow up on. I worked in the Ontario Public Service for 33 years. Do you know what it's like to try to get a decision out of a minister's office on anything? You want to talk about delays, you want to talk about frustrating, you want to talk about bureaucracy. It's endemic, and this bill, like no bill before it, foists that on all of our school boards. The minister says, we need this bill because trustees have been going wild with their budgets. And in fact, he kicked out trustees from 8 school boards with this as a leading reason. Well, let's talk about the biggest one, the Toronto District School Board. The budget passed by the trustees last fall was so terrible that we need the minister to take over the school board through his supervisor. Well, guess what? Months later, that supervisor, who is directed and accounts to the minister, like this bill would have school boards operating more or less across the board, well, They're still using the same budget the trustees passed that was so bad that the trustees were booted out of office. Does that make sense? We think this bill has to just be withdrawn, and as we've heard from so many others, go back to the drawing board. Talk to those of us who the minister didn't talk to. That's most of us, before he designed it. But as an alternative, if the government is insistent on using its majority to ram this bill through, we've proposed 8 amendments. I'm going to summarize the guts of them. Number 1, and they're not numbered in accordance with the bill, but first, delay the bill's proclamation until 2030. There are huge mountains of work that have to be done before this bill can go into effect. You can't proclaim it in effect, leave schools and school boards in total chaos while they're waiting for one directive after another to be designed. We say delay its proclamation till 2013. We also recommend that we should delay the bill's proclamation in force until the Auditor General has conducted and made public an independent audit, an independent accounting for what this bill would cost, so voters know what they're on the hook for and what money they're going to be taking out of classrooms to pay for all this red tape and bureaucracy that the Ford government is determined to invent. Next, the minister said when he introduced this bill that he is dramatically changing the role of trustees. You read this bill, I have, it's not a pretty sight. You can't tell what the duties, roles, powers of trustees are when you read this bill. People might want to run for that office, he thought. But before you run for a public office, before you put the time and money and effort into it, you want to know what you're running for. Read this bill, read all 75 single-spaced pages. You won't have a clue. We want the bill amended to clearly define what the authority of the trustees are. If they don't, they're causing chaos in schools for bureaucrats, for school board trustees, for families. Next, with all of these powers that the bill gives to the minister, we need the bill to impose on the minister a duty to consult the public, including parents, including trustees, including school boards, including teachers' unions, including voters, before making any of these rules and regulations and directives and policies and God knows what else. Now you might think, well, wouldn't the minister naturally do that? Unfortunately, no. After all, he didn't in developing this bill. Why should we expect any more in implementing this bill? I don't think so. From the point of view of people with disabilities, we know that when you give a government bureaucrat or bureaucrats a bunch of new powers, there's a serious risk that they won't take into account the needs of people with disabilities, here students with disabilities, when they use that power. That's why we live in a world full of barriers. So we want the bill amended to require that the minister may not, through any of his or her regulations or directives or policies or whatever the heck's in there, may not create any new barriers that will hurt people with disabilities. Right now we have 8 school boards under provincial supervision. We need an orderly route back to local democracy. All the minister said is, oh, I want to wait till they're on the right track. Remember, it's his supervisors who I guess he thinks aren't on the right track. But at the very least, we say the bill should be amended to require that the 8 school boards be returned to local democracy by or on November 15th, 2026. That's the date that is relevant given the upcoming election. Now, the minister might say, well, what if they're not in good shape? So we're prepared to accept that the provision should allow him to issue an order exempting a board or boards from among the 8 from that, but it should set out clear criteria that must be met before they can be left under provincial supervision. Not this amorphous, mushy, meaningless on the right track. Finally, our amendments call for the legislation to be amended to require by November 1st that the ministry, that the government finally enact the promised education accessibility standard under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. This bill, in conclusion, doesn't put students first. It actually puts red tape and bureaucracy first. It's a gift to school board bureaucrats who won't have the kind of oversight by local democratically elected trustees that we need. We suggest that the bill's name be changed. Let's just call it the putting red tape and bloated bureaucracy first. At least it would be accurate, even though it would also be a deeply disturbing piece of legislation. This bill is a disaster for people with disabilities. It definitely needs a major rewrite. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mentioned that there's nothing in this bill to help students with disabilities, and you mentioned the school climate survey, but do you have other specific examples of things in the bill that might specifically harm students with disabilities?
Sure. Let me give you an example. I'll give a couple examples. First, as Bruce mentioned in his opening remarks, the bill gives the minister responsibility, essentially decision-making authority, micromanaging school construction, renovation, additions, and so on. It doesn't require him to ensure that those new schools are accessible. And I can tell you that there are about 20 pages of the recommendations in the Kindergarten to Grade 12 Standards Development Committee report that the government received on January 28th of 2022 that provide what an accessible school would include. And I know about it because I chaired the subcommittee of that committee that developed those recommendations. And we've been calling on the government's been, now you might think, well, wouldn't the government do that anyway? But they don't. Year after year, there are announcements that the government proudly says they're giving $1 billion or $1.5 billion this year to build new schools. We each time have asked them to commit that new school construction would be accessible using not the outdated Ontario Building Code, which is grossly inadequate, but recommendations like those which the government received 4 years ago from an expert advisory committee that the government was government appointed, originally by the prior government, reaffirmed by the current government. They've never done it. They've never announced it. They've never answered. They've never even called us to have a conversation about how to do it. So there's one example. Number two, you've heard how the minister talks about attendance. But what he doesn't do is talk about, in any way under this bill, requiring him in any strategy, not just to exempt students with special education needs from his new attendance rules. That's something that the Toronto Star says he's considering. You don't just make a new rule and then exempt students with disabilities. You actually address the problem of attendance by students with disabilities. At that town hall that was held 2 weeks ago that Bruce talked about by the Special Education Advisory Committee, you should check out the video because you can see what was said. I chaired that committee. By the way, that was a committee that the TDSB staff did not want us to hold at all. And Minister Calandra did not want live streamed at all. But this is parents' voice. And you'll hear parents talking, for example, about how their students' disability-related special education needs were not being met, they weren't getting the support they needed, and the child developed mental health issues and therefore absented themselves from school. So here's an example of now if we're going to have a provincial rule that says, you got to show up to school or it's going to be held against you in your grades, and you want an exemption, that means you're going to have to go prove why you're entitled to it. For a student who's got a mental health disorder arising in no small part because of inadequate provincial support, we got the province making the mess, and then and nothing in the bill requiring them to actually solve the problem that they say they're wanting to tackle. I could give you tons of more. The main thing you need to know. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
You know, there's the attendance issues about exclusions and modified schedules that emanate from the principal and the school administration because they don't have the adequate staff and other supports to care for kids. But it goes much farther. There was a story that CBC ran on Saturday about an elopement, a child running off school property. This happens regularly. We have been in this room a few times each year to raise these issues, and some of the very nearly tragic results, and Max somehow is just, you know, the worst of them. But there's not enough staff there to protect the kids from doing those things. And none of this is helping. None of it.
Let me give you one more example, because it's a fantastic question. Right now, under existing legislation, each school board must consult its special education advisory committee that it must have on the special education budget for the board. Well, if the trustees no longer have responsibility for the budget under this bill, like, great, but who cares? You talk to bureaucrats, they say thank you very much, and then they can very easily ignore your views. We've taken budget issues at TDSB to the trustees over the heads of staff sometimes. But right now, under this bill, the budget process is going to be buried in more secrecy than ever before. It seems that the Tories' concern when it comes to school board budgets is there just hasn't been enough secrecy around them. We need more. That doesn't help us. We're supposed to have a voice in that budget, school board after school board. This is just going to get worse, and it's not pretty now.
And just really quickly, as a parent of a child with disabilities, it's already exceptionally difficult to advocate for them. It was already like pushing a boulder uphill to get an answer from anyone, to get support that you need. And that was before some of the sweeping changes that this bill and those that come before it have proposed. Losing trustees, we don't know what their role will be. We don't know if they'll have any power to address our concerns. They might just be like an answering service, like the Family Support Office. Like, we really don't know. And coupled that with more bureaucracy and boards being directed not to tell parents about things that are happening in their schools, things around staffing. The TDSB, David, correct me if I'm wrong, has already directed their staffing not to tell parents what the model looks like next year. So we're going in blind as parents, trying to, feeling our way through the dark, trying to get support for our children. That was, again, already difficult, but this bill has made it even more difficult by removing the data and the access points we had.
Do any of you speak French by any chance?
Fortunately not me, sorry.
Embarrassingly badly. I apologize. I just want to tell you that we've seen at TDSB how much worse things have gotten for students with disabilities since the province took over the board last summer. So this isn't a hypothetical. We've seen what happens. We've seen when we won a major decision before the trustees last June on maintaining a certain cap on the size of certain special education classes. The staff went behind our back to the supervisor, got him to reverse that decision within weeks of taking office. We've seen the board barreling more and more towards closing, gradually shutting down a couple of special education high schools for which parents regale us with stories of how effective they've been. We've seen the senior staff at the board, since they don't have the trustees calling them to trustee meetings in public anymore and able to ask them questions, becoming more of a brick wall for us to deal with. Oh, they're pleasant and they smile. But they're becoming more like a brick wall because they don't have to worry about the trustees. I suspect, this is my inference, that if anything, what they're worried about is not creating any action that might infuriate the minister. You know, the minister's supervisor summarily fired the director of education for the Toronto District School Board last December. He'd worked in this system for years. He had been the assistant deputy minister responsible for special education. And we had our moments when we disagreed with him, that's fine. But when you have that kind of summary firing, no reasons given, that's got to put the fear of God in other senior management at the board that they could be next.
Same thing happened in Ottawa Carleton.
And in a system where the school boards are all going to be essentially beholden to the province, where the trustees have had their powers gutted and impossible to even figure out. Yeah, they'll be there, but as a shadow of what they were. This is the danger of this happening across the province is manifest. I think we're done for time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.